Hey there, welcome to Inner Songwriting Theory. Today I'll be introducing you to the world of dominant chords. I recommend a basic understanding of the major scale, seventh chords and the harmonic chord progression before we begin. If you don't have that, you can always look at my other videos afterwards. A dominant chord is one of the most important harmonic roles that a chord can have. It appears in rock, jazz, classical, funk, hip-hop, nearly all styles of music, and is probably as old as chords themselves. Harnessing the power of the dominant chord in your music allows you to manipulate the ear of your listener and also play with their expectations. Sounds pretty crazy, I know. They allow you to create harmonically rich chord progressions, change keys with ease, and incorporate the sounds of many different styles into your music. So let's find out exactly what they are. A dominant chord is a chord that pulls towards another chord. In other words, it creates so much tension that the only way to resolve it is to move to the next chord.
I like tension.
Have a listen for yourself to the tension and the resolution. They naturally occur on the 5th degree of the harmonic chord progression of the major scale, with a tension that makes you want to resolve to the 1. This is often described as a 5-to-1 relationship, also known as the dominant and tonic. In the key of C, for example, G7 would pull towards C. It's also important to understand the tonic in order to understand the dominant and its uses. A tonic chord can be major or minor. The dominant will resolve well to either option. Dominant chords come in many different forms. The most common form is as a 7 chord, also known as a dominant 7th, made up of a root, 3rd, 5th and flat 7. For example, G7, D7, or any other dominant 7th chord for that matter. They can also appear as regular major chords, 9ths, 11ths, 13ths. There are even special types called altered dominants that have increased tension and an even greater pull to the tonic, even tenser than this. But let's not make it more complicated than it already is. For the sake of ease, I'm going to deal exclusively with 7s. Careful not to mix up your major 7 and your dominant 7. This is a really common mistake when getting to grips with 7th chords in general. A major 7 features a root, 3rd, 5th and 7, whilst a dominant 7 chord features a root, 3rd, 5th and flat 7. They are not interchangeable. The tension and pull of a dominant chord actually comes from the tritone interval between the 3rd and the flat 7. Watch my video on 7th chords for more information. Luckily, dominant chords always follow the same logic. Your dominant is always the 5 to your 1. Like I said earlier, you must understand your tonic in order to understand your dominant. There are a couple different ways to measure this. The way I prefer is to get to know your major scales and your harmonic chord progression. If you know your major scales, you can simply pick out your 1 or 5. For example, if I have an A as my 1 or tonic chord, I can work out the A major scale to find E7 is my 5 or dominant. If my tonic is B, I can use my B major scale to work out that F sharp 7 is my dominant. The same works in reverse too. If my dominant is E7, I can count backwards from the 5 to find A is my 1. Starting from F sharp 7, I can count back from 5 to find B is my 1. The process is the same whether your tonic is major or minor. Another way involves counting semitones in the chromatic scale. The dominant chord is always 7 semitones above your target chord or tonic. For example, if I have my tonic as C, I can start there and count 7 semitones up to find that the dominant of C is G7. If my tonic is D, I can count 7 semitones up to find the dominant is A7. This works in every case. If I start with my dominant instead, we simply reverse the process. If I was to start on G and count 7 semitones backwards, I would find my dominant G7 pulls to C. Whichever way you choose, the chords will not be different. but this can be a long-winded method, so make sure that you get to know your major scales. A practical way you can get to know them is to recognize them as shapes and patterns on your instrument. On the guitar, power chords feature a root note and a fifth. Convert the root note into your tonic chord and your fifth into the root of your dominant chord to find your 5-to-1 relationship. It's also worth knowing that an E-shaped bar chord acts as a dominant to an A-shaped bar chord on the same fret. How about on the keyboard? If you know your tonic chord is made up of a root, third and fifth, you can find the dominant chord by playing a seventh chord starting on the fifth of your tonic chord. And what about on a MIDI roll? If you're inputting MIDI, you can count 7 semitones in an even simpler form using your grid as a reference. These are just a handful of visualizations, and you can find many more by practically applying the concept. Now that we can find it, let's use it. Dominant chords have several classic uses. Let's explore a handful of them. The perfect cadence is the original use of the 5-to-1 movement. It's a traditional ending for music in many different styles. All I have to do is ensure I end my chord progression with a 5-to-1. Here's a quick example in F, using F, A minor, B flat and C7, with C7 being the dominant chord that pulls us back to F. The logic being that the tension caused by the 5 chord, C7, pulls us back home to the tonic chord, F, thus resolving the entire piece. Here's another example using a minor tonic. The chord progression is D minor 7, G minor 7 and A minor 7, but the second time round I play an A7 instead, the dominant that pulls us back to D minor. Here's an example from Eminem's The Real Slim Shady, which features the repeated harmony of C minor, F minor, E flat and G, with the G acting as the dominant to our tonic of C minor, thus bringing us back to the beginning of the progression for another repetition. The perfect cadence combined with the minor key and the harpsichord give the beat a distinctive Baroque sound. Another classic use of the dominant chord is to make smooth key changes. If I can use the tension to return home, maybe I can use the tension to move to a new home altogether. For example, I have a simple 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of C, but I'd like to modulate to this 1-4-5 chord progression in the key of E instead. All I have to do is find out the dominant of my new tonic E, in this case B7, and incorporate it into my transition to smoothly move the listener's ear to the new key. Let's have a listen to the results. For good measure, let's listen to it without our transitionary dominant 7-2. As you can hear, it's abrupt, but it doesn't sound bad. All the dominant chord does is prepare the listener for the transition. This can be done as many times as you like with nearly any chord progression. I could continue to move through different keys if I wanted. Let's try a different style. This time I'm going to start in C before using A7 to move to the key of D, B7 to the key of E, and so on. There are no rules to the types of chord progression that you can apply this to. You could even move between minor keys and major keys at your own will. Secondary dominants are dominant chords that don't pull to the root of the key. Dominants always pull to a set tonic. For example, G7 will always pull to a C. F7 will always pull to a B flat. A flat 7 will always pull towards the D flat. This does not change. It doesn't matter whether they're out of key or not. Knowing that every major and minor has a dominant 7 chord that pulls towards it means we can take standard chord progressions and use dominant 7s to strengthen the pull to each chord. This can be used to create gentle interest or a rich tapestry of harmonic movement. Let's take a bland, dull progression and slowly fill it with secondary dominants. Here it is on its own. Not that interesting at all. Let's spice it up by adding the dominant that pulls towards A minor, which is E7, a C7 to pull to F, a D7 to pull to G, and finally change G to G7 to pull back to C. Almost unrecognizable. But now our bland, boring progression sounds like something completely different. This technique can lead you down the rabbit hole when you find out that dominants can also pull to dominants.
He's gone way too far this time.
Notice how the style of the music changed after I added the secondary dominants. Secondary dominants can be used in any style, but the sound of outside chords does give it a particular flavour. This is just a sample. A classic real-world example of a secondary dominant features in the principal chord progression of Stevie Wonder's Isn't She Lovely, made up of C sharp minor, F sharp 7, B11 and E. The F sharp 7 acts as a dominant to the B11 chord, while the B11 chord is another form of dominant chord that pulls us to the root chord of E. Have a listen. Effectively, we have a secondary dominant pulling us to a dominant which pulls us to our tonic. I have an entire video just on secondary dominants because it can be such a complicated subject. When you feel ready, take a look. There are many subjects to cover regarding the uses of dominant 7s. This includes tritone substitution, altered dominants, predominant chords, tonic 7th chords, and many more. This is literally the tip of the iceberg, and we can only cover so much in one video. So this is just the introduction to a series of videos about dominant 7th chords and how to include them in your music. We have plenty of time. Absorbing the concept of dominant chords can be really tough, especially if this is the first time you've come across functional chords. A functional chord is simply a chord that has a specific role, but here are some ideas to help make it easier to absorb. Number 1. Listen to music that uses them. Listening to music that uses them can normalize the sound. It gives you a subconscious understanding of the concept. Classical music used and abused all of today's concepts, as did jazz and blues. Certain classic songwriters of all genres in the past 60 years have also made heavy use of them, including Freddie Mercury, Stevie Wonder, Elton John, and many more. Like I said earlier, it's used in nearly all music in one way or another. It would be impossible to give a definitive list, so here are just a handful of starting points. Try and spot it for yourself. Number 2. Learn songs with dominant chords. Once you've listened, get busy learning. Try to spot the dominant movements as you learn. Putting a physical pattern to a concept is the most powerful way to understand something. Number 3. Write music using them. And it's the very reason that you're here. As usual, I have writing tips waiting for you at the end of this video. Number 4. Write out the concept. Don't be afraid to write out the ideas and concepts in a way you understand. Maybe you can plan chord progressions on paper before you play them. Number 5. Isolate the idea. Practice working out the dominants of different tonic chords. This is something you can do in your head or on a notepad wherever you are. Remember, there are only 12 different 5-to-1 movements. Eventually, you'll know them all off by heart. Number 6. Practice them. Finally, use your instrument to practice playing them. Maybe you could go through every key and practice in versions that you like. You could practice specific 5-to-1 shapes on the guitar, such as a C7 shape moving to an E shape bar chord in different places. Or maybe switching between a root position tonic and first inversion dominant 7 chord on the keyboard. Eventually, we'll begin to associate the movement and the shape with the sound and the concept, stimulating all the tools that we use to learn. It can take a lot of trial and error to incorporate this concept. This combined with the effort of thinking means it can take time. Start simple. Don't try ramming a piece of music with loads of complex ideas at once. At least not yet. It's better to explore this concept using simple chord progressions, at least to begin. Notice how most of the examples from today were based on the harmonic chord progression. Dominant chords always work better with simple starting points. When you're used to it, make it as complex as you want. And for the love of the Lord above, please make sure you can count 7 semitones or this won't go well. I am not making a video on how to count to 7, except for my video on odd time, like the one about counting 7s. Learn your chords. This may seem really obvious, but if you're no good at playing individual chords, trying to use a concept like this will not go well. Get to know a bare minimum of your major, minor and basic 7th chords and how to change between them. Otherwise, this will be doubly frustrating. You also run the risk of getting a bad impression of what is a pretty powerful tool. Take advantage of the many different videos that I have on different types of chord. Try different dominants. Sometimes a 7 chord doesn't quite fit, but remember, there are several different forms of the dominant chord. Let's take an earlier progression and replace those 7ths with major triads instead. I'll play the original first and repeat it with triads. So it's a subtle difference, but it could be what you needed. Different inversions can also make a huge difference too. Here's a root position G7 followed by a root position C. And here is a first inversion G7 followed by a root position C. Try an experiment to find the right sound for you. Be your own boss. Why would you let a chord tell you what to do? Just because a dominant 7 wants to go somewhere doesn't mean you have to obey it. We can withhold that resolution and mislead the ear of the listener. Keep following this series to learn more about this concept. Today we heard mock classical, jazz, blues and more, even different time signatures, rhythms, chord qualities and keys. Sometimes this concept might sound better in a specific context. Remember, the aim is to be writing songs, not chord progressions. If you make it sound like a song from the very beginning, you unlock its full potential. If you didn't understand everything, do not stress. There are many more videos waiting for you all about dominant chords. When you feel comfortable with the basics, take a look at my video on secondary dominants. But before you do, get writing your own music using this concept. Perfect cadences, key changes, or even secondary dominants if you feel brave. Experiment to your heart's content, and remember you can watch this video as many times as you want if you need a reminder. Don't be afraid to write things down. Feel free to comment your own writing tips, your own examples of dominance, whatever you want. Stay tuned for more videos on songwriting and music theory. Thanks for watching Inner Songwriting Theory.